But here's what happens. We get off and we sin. Our whole entire life is a mess. And now, even though as Christians we knew that we have a relationship with God, sometimes he still feels distant, doesn't it? But can I remind you of what the gospel actually is? Hey, we're going to be in Acts chapter 17 this morning. Acts 17, if you want to go ahead and make your way over there. Now, if you have been coming to Grace Point the last few weeks, you might be like, wait a minute, Acts 17, we skipped over Acts 16, and you would be right in that, all right? Because whenever I came here and I interviewed, this was back in June, first Sunday of June, I had to pick a passage, and I chose Acts 16, and I think it was a decent sermon, because y'all hired me. And so because of that, though, I wanted to actually spend some extra time and go into detail in other parts of the book of Acts. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to go from Acts 15 last week all the way up to Acts 17 here this week. And if you wanted to go back and watch it, now I know most of you are like, Joel, we memorize all your sermons. We don't need that. I get it. Thank you. I appreciate it. But hey, if you wanted to go back, you can watch it first Sunday of June there. But let me get you caught up for those of you that might not have the whole thing memorized, right? And so last week we were talking about in Acts 15, and in Acts 15 there was this story of the church coming together. But then after Acts 15 happens, then Acts 16 comes, as our numbers work. And in Acts 16 there's now Paul and Silas, and they go to this little town called Philippi, and they first minister to this woman named Lydia, and she's going to be the very first convert in all of Europe. And then after they reach Lydia, then they go out and they reach this little slave girl that was demon possessed, and they minister to her and preach to the gospel to her. But her owners did not like that very much, and because her owners did not like that, they throw Paul and Silas in prison. And it says about midnight in Acts 16, about midnight, they were singing and praising the Lord. They were singing those songs just like we were. You know, it's your breath in our lungs. As they were singing out there, then an earthquake happens. Everybody comes out. The jailer is about ready to kill himself because he thought he had just lost all the prisoners. They say, stop, and they minister to that jailer. That jailer gets saved, and now there's a church that started in the city of Philippi. Now, the leaders of the Philippi area, they say, all right, now Paul and Silas, will you please get out of here? You have caused enough trouble. So then in Acts 17, they come here, and that's where we're going to start picking up. Now we're going to focus in at the last half of Acts 17, but first, Paul and Silas, you'll start to see this theme where they go to a new city, and the same thing happens over and over and over again. And the very first thing that happens whenever they get over to first the church of Thessalonica, and they get there and they start to minister to all the people in Thessalonica. And there's this guy named Jason. And this guy, Jason, he brings in Paul and he brings in Silas. But people did not like that Jason welcomed Paul and Silas in. And so they start to make a claim against Paul and Silas. And I love this. Let me just read verse 6 here for us in Acts 17. It says, these men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. And Jason has received them, and they are acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. Man, I love that accusation. Oh, if that could be said about the people at Grace Point, right? If that could be said to where it's like, man, every time the people at Grace Point goes on a missions trip, they turn the whole country upside down. Every time that we leave these doors and we go out in the schools, we go out in the workplaces, we go out into our neighborhoods, it turns the world upside down. That is a wonderful accusation because there is another king and his name is Jesus. And that is our calling. And that is the call for us now as a church is how do we become like that? That the moment that we walk in the door, they're like, oh no, the Christians are here. Things are about to change. But inevitably what happens in this city as well is that some people are going to believe, other people are going to hate them. You see this theme over and over and over again. They leave then Thessalonica, they go to Berea. Now, you might remember that name, but the Bereans, it says in verse 11 now, I think it says that the Bereans were more noble than the people at Thessalonica. They were more noble. Why? Because they received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. And so now there's people, they hear Paul, and for the very first time, they're like, well, let's actually see if this is in Scripture. And so they open up the Bible, they examine that, and they make sure that everything that Paul is saying is actually in the Scripture, and they believe because of it. And by the way, this is also a good model for us as well. Listen, I don't want you just to believe me. Like, I want you to believe me. I do want you to believe me. But don't believe it because Pastor Joel said it. Believe it because it's in the Bible. And you got full permission to fact check me, all right? And if I ever say something that's not in the Bible, then you come and you ask and you talk about that with me because I have no authority. And wherever you go to church, by the way, that pastor, I have no authority over you. The Bible does, though. So whenever I can say, thus saith the Lord, whenever I can say the Bible says, that's where our authority is. And these people, because they examine Scripture, they start to believe, but guess what happens? Some people believe, some people hate them, they drive them out, and finally now Paul gets to this city called Athens. Athens. Now, you probably have heard of the city of Athens before. It's still around. And he gets there, and we're going to start to pick up in verse 16 of Acts chapter 17 now. In verse 16 it says, now when Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. His spirit was provoked. And why was it provoked? Because as he looked around, there was nothing but idols everywhere that he looked. And what did that do inside of him? It provoked him. It stirred him. And that's the very first point here, is that the idols around us should stir something inside of us. The idols around us should stir something. You know, I remember whenever I was a kid, my family and I took a road trip out to California, and it was a long drive, and we were driving, and we got several hours into the trip, and eventually we had to stop. Now, the way that we were taking the route, it actually went straight through Las Vegas, and as a 10-year-old kid, this was my very first time in the city of Las Vegas. I wasn't a big gambler at that time, and still not. And but in all reality, like, you know, me growing up in a very conservative, like, homeschool kid and all that, like, I knew about Las Vegas. I knew it was called Sin City, but that's about all I knew. And as we started to get closer to Sin City, Las Vegas, I started to feel a little bit uncomfortable as like a 10-year-old kid. And as we got there, it was actually just so happened that as we were getting closer, it was getting dark, and we were going to spend the night somewhere before we could get out all the way to California on our vacation. And so we ended up pulling off, and we had to stay at a place near Las Vegas, and it was a casino with a hotel, because there's no hotels without a casino in it. And I just remember, like, I went to my dad. I was like, Dad, this is not right. You know, this was the moment I knew I was going to be a pastor someday, you know, as a 10-year-old kid. There was something inside of me that was like, we can't do this. We can't support. Why? Because it made me uncomfortable. You know, a couple years ago, my wife and I, we flew out to the Grand Canyon, and inevitably we flew into Las Vegas, and we spent a night there before going down. And you know what? As a 30-something, it no longer did it really bother me. Like, I knew what I was getting. I knew, and it's like, we still didn't go and do anything. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you, because what stays in Vegas? No, I'm just kidding. But I remember, as like, you know what? It didn't bother me as much as a child. And then honestly, I was like, I kind of wish it did, though. Like, I kind of wish I didn't get so degraded. And it's like, I knew what I was expecting. I've been around this now. And so no longer did it bother me. And I wonder how many times we walk outside of these doors in Northwest Arkansas, and there's idols all around us, and it doesn't even bother us. We hardly even notice it, because we've gotten so used to it. And my prayer is like, Lord, please wake me up to these idols that are all around us. Wake me up to it, because they would go around, and this is the way this is going to represent an idol. And at first I thought about, it's like, man, I should build something like really nice and make it look like an idol. And then I remember, like, the second commandment is don't make idols. So I was like, that seems sketchy. I'm not going to do that. So use your imagination. All right. But we walk around, and there's idols. There's idols in this community there's idols in my own heart. And I'm going to ask you, what are those idols now that maybe we have become accustomed to? Maybe it's so common that we have walked by it 100 times that we don't even notice it anymore. But for Paul, it started to stir something inside of him. And so it goes on to say, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews. So that's what he always did. He first went out to the synagogues. That was like the churches for them. He reasoned with them, but then also in the marketplace, every day with those who happened to be there. So not only did he go out and he reasoned with all the people in the churches, but then he also went out in the marketplace. And the gospel is good for church, yes, but it's also good for out there. It's good for every single one of us. And we start to see that as well, that Paul goes out and he starts to minister. He starts to reach people for the gospel. And why? Because when we're filled with the Spirit, silence is not an option. When we're filled with the Spirit, when you go through the book of Acts, one of the things that you are going to notice whenever somebody is being filled and controlled by the Spirit, the number one marker is that they have a bold faith. Right? Like we go to all the miracles and we want to see the cool things and speaking in tongues and all of that the book of Acts talks about. And that's all cool and all. But in reality, if you look all through the whole New Testament, what you will find is that the number one marker for when you are Spirit-filled is that you have a boldness of your faith. That you're willing to step out and say, you know what? I'm going to tell the gospel to that person. I'm going to preach to them as well. You know, a little while ago, we were going to a little kid's birthday party, my wife and I, and we pulled up, and as we were pulling up there, I was getting all the kids out, and if like anytime we have, you know, I forget how many kids we have. That's how many kids we have, and it takes a lot of work to get all the kids out, and it's kind of a stressful thing of trying to get everybody in. And as I was unloading all the children out there, I saw 3 very well-dressed men walk up behind me, and that's not a normal thing for most of the children parties that I go to. But I could immediately tell. This is back in Florida. I could immediately tell that they were Jehovah's Witnesses. Now we didn't have as many Mormons, but we had a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses where I was in Florida, and so I had a lot of conversations with these guys before, but they walk up to me, and as I'm unloading and I'm giving the baby over to my wife, and I was like, hey, I'll be there in just a moment, and she kind of rolled her eyes because she knew what I was wanting to do, and I turn around, and these 3 guys come up, they're like, hey, can we tell you some good news about heaven from the Bible? And I was like, I'd love good news about heaven from the Bible, like, yes, I would love to hear that. And then before they answered me any further, I was like, but, oh, by the way, what Bible are we talking about? And in that moment, they answered very quickly. They said, oh, we love lots of different versions of the Bible. We even love the King James Version. And I was like, I love King Jimmy too. No way. But then I looked at him, I was like, but I bet the Bible that you're holding right now is the New World Translation, which is their Bible. And when I said that, there were 3 guys, like 2 in the front, 1 in the back. And whenever I said, I bet the one that you're holding is the New World Translation, the guy in the back was just like, he just like walked away, and I was like, to this day, I don't know where that dude went. He just walked away, and they were like, oh, it sounds like you have actually studied this. You know a little bit about it, and I do know a little bit about Jehovah's Witnesses, and I know, for instance, that they, unlike the Bereans, they didn't ever actually studied it, because what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe is that the Michael, the archangel, the guy in the Old Testament, somehow then God makes him into Jesus. He creates him and makes him into Jesus, and then one day Jesus is going to go back to being Michael, the archangel in Revelation. It's a weird belief, and so I just told him that. I was like, guys, if you read this 1,000 straight times in a row, you're never going to come to the conclusion that Jesus Christ is God himself, that he was not created, he does not have a father, he does not have a mother in that sense like you and I have. He is God himself. Listen, this is the type of thing that we are going to be confronted with. Because right now, I don't know if you've ever realized this, but right now, we're talking about Athens and they have temples and everything. Did you all know that we share a parking lot with a temple? Right? Like it's literally in our parking lot. And we can see that, and that's an easy one. But then how many other temples do we have in our workplaces that might look like money, might look like the promotion? How many other temples do we have that might look like our child's travel football team or travel baseball team? How many idols do we have? And now in this moment It's a moment, if we are truly Spirit-filled Christians, it's going to be something that confronts us, provokes us in such a way that says, I'm going to go out and I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to minister. I'm going to confront the idols in my life, and I'm going to help point other people to Jesus as well. And as it goes on to say here, in verse 18, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. Now, we know about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. These are kind of like those level of philosophers. And it says, some of them said, what does this babbler wish to say? I feel like some people have said that about me. Others said, he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. For you will bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling and hearing something new. And so they come, they're like, hey, this guy's saying something new. For then, they were the philosophers. I don't know if you ever had to take philosophy class in college in the undergraduate. That class annoyed me so much because philosophy means lover of wisdom, but yet somehow they loved wisdom so much that they started asking dumb questions again, right? Like, do I really exist? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I do. Can we move? But these were these type of people. They sat around, they debated, they thought of themselves highly. The Epicureans, they actually thought that there were gods, but the gods were they had a deist point of view, that there were gods and they were heaven, but they had no care whatsoever about what was happening here on earth, because they were just living in pure bliss and happiness up in heaven, and they could care less about humans. So there was a God, but he was very distant from them. The Stoics that were also there, they were actually agnostic. They didn't really believe in a God at all and thought it's all about just natural law and natural reason, and that was the highest level that you could ever get to. And so now Paul comes in and says, guys, that this God isn't far off. This God is right here. This God is Jesus. He's actually he's raised up from the dead. And they say, well, tell us more. Like, this is something new. This will keep us entertained on a Tuesday. Let's have him over and talk. And so Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said to him, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious, which was a compliment to them. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. And he says, I can see that you guys are very religious. Do we actually have a picture of the place that he was at here? Oftentimes it'll also be called Mars Hill because it was after the goddess for Mars. And this is where it is. You might have seen pictures of the Pantheon before. That was on the other side of it. This is the Acropolis is also there in Athens. But this was a place where they would just go and they'd have court and they would reason and they'd talk about ideas. And all throughout this area, there's going to be all sorts of different idols set up. And you would probably have all sorts of wonderful idols and of all the different Greek gods. And I don't know if they look like, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Andrew Brown or whatever. I don't know. But there would be this wonderful, wonderful images there of people worshiping. And then he got to one. Paul says, I looked around and there was even one that said, to the unknown God. To the unknown God. And Paul, what a genius he was, says, I want to tell you about that one. I want to tell you about that unknown God, the God that you did not know. Now, what's interesting for them, a little bit different for them, for us. See, they knew that they were worshiping something, but they didn't know what they were worshiping. For us, we know what it is that we're passionate about, but we never realize that we're actually worshiping it. Can I tell you what your idols might be? Whatever you spend the most time on and the most money on is probably that idol that's right here for you, that unknown idol. And you might say, no, that can't be true. Like, here's the deal. I don't want to get to heaven one day and have to tell God, well, I spent about 10 times as much on golf as I ever did your mission in your church. Like I spent way more time on my kids' baseball than I ever did actually discipling them. What you spend the most time on and what you spend the most money on is probably going to be the idol in your life. And we can say other things here, but that was what worship was, is what do you spend your time on? What do you spend your money on? And so for all of us now, there's probably things on this. What is it? And he says now, I want to tell you about an unknowing God. And I love it. He connects it so beautifully, though, because he's going to connect what they know to Jesus. And we have an opportunity to do this as well, though, for the people around us. I saw a great example of this. I don't know if Chris is in here, but Chris Clemens, earlier this week, he just got baptized, and he baptized his whole family a couple weeks ago, which was awesome. Entire family guy. He was just so excited. He's like, I need to tell more people about Jesus. So he ended up putting up an entire car show and had a booth there with flyers and to share the gospel, engage people with the gospel. So for Chris now, he took something that could be an idol, but he says, you know what? I'm going to take that thing, and now I'm going to turn around and twist it, and I'm going to reach other people for the gospel. And that's a challenge for us. Is spending money and time on hobbies sinful? No, not necessarily. It can be, but not necessarily. But now we have an opportunity in the exact same way to say, you know what? What can I do now to take those things, the gifts that God has given me, yes, but how can I transform it to help reach other people as well? And so Paul comes in here, and he starts to share the gospel with them. And in verse 24 it says, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he is starting to preach the gospel in a way that's going to confront the philosophers of that day, right? Because they thought that there was a God, but he was far off. They thought there was gods, but they did not care. But he's like, no, there is a God. There's one God. He made everything, but he does not live in the temples that you just saw pictures of. We can't even serve him. It's not like God needs us, but he's inviting us into it. And this now, he starts to preach the gospel because he believed the gospel and he is provoked by the idols around him. And in the same way for us, the gospel demands a witness. The gospel demands that we witness. The gospel demands it if we truly believe it. I've heard an atheist say it. He says, I never mind when Christians try to witness to me. He's like, if they actually thought I was going to hell, and they didn't tell me, how much would they have to hate me to not tell me? How much would you have to hate somebody to see a truck driving at them, about ready to kill them, and you not say, get out of the way? In the same way, if we truly believe the gospel of Jesus Christ, it demands that we go out. It demands that we share this. And it says now that he is not served, verse 25 again, though he need not anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Verse 26, for he made from one man every nation as Adam of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and boundaries for their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For them, they thought that God was far and distant. But here's the beautiful message of the gospel, is that he's not distant anymore because he came down to us. He came down to us. Let me illustrate what they might have thought this looked like and what we often think it looks like. Connor, can you come up here for a second? I'm going to invite my friend Connor here. And let me illustrate. Can you guys give Connor a round of applause? I'm putting him on the spot real quick here. Here's oftentimes, Connor, you just stand here. This dude is the size of a Greek god. All right, so this is oftentimes what they felt like was that their gods were up here and we're down here, right? That their gods were living up there. They could care less, but we're down here in the muck and the mire and all the dirtiness. We're down here in our 9 to 5. We're down here, going through struggles. And it's like, man, the gods do not care about us, is how they feel and how a lot of us feel as well, right? That we feel like, yeah, that God is up there, but does he really care about me? But in reality, what happens too for us is that even after we get saved, here's what I've noticed for a lot of Christians. They know that it's like, yeah, I have a relationship with God. God and I, like, he came down, he saved me. But here's what happens. We get off and we sin. We get off and we go drinking again, and we went too far again. And we go off and we end up just going off. We get divorced. Our whole entire life is a mess. And now, even though as Christians we knew that we have a relationship with God, sometimes he still feels distant, doesn't it? Like he's back there and I've left him. But can I remind you of what the gospel actually is? Connor, I want you to follow me. I want you to follow me awkwardly close, all right? Here's what happens, all right? When I go and sin and I go a little bit farther away from God, and I go out and I sin again, and I get caught up in addiction, and I get caught up in ways that I never thought of. I am so far away removed from God. I feel like I could never make my way back to God. He was there the whole time. And this is the story of the gospel. All you have to do is turn around, and he's been there the whole entire time. This is the story for you and me as well. Thank you, Connor. Give Connor a round of applause. God is not far off. He's not somebody that you have to work to get to. He's done all the work. He came down to us. He found us. This is the wonderful story of the gospel that is true for us and is true for every single person that we get a witness to as well. And he says, verse 28 now, for in him we live and move and have our being. And as some, even your own poets have said, this is incredible. He's quoting their own poets to support what he's saying. For we are indeed his offspring. He's like, even you know that we're the God's offspring. This is true. Verse 29, being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art or by imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, to turn around, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he appointed. And all of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. And he says now, there is a God. He made it all. And you might think that he is distant and removed, but yet the same God that made all of creation was the same God that came down into creation to come and find you so that you might have the opportunity to have a relationship with him. That's the type of God that we serve. That's how wonderful this story is. But one day there will be a judgment. One day there is going to be a reckoning to say, but did I actually pursue him? Did I actually believe in him? One day that very same Jesus that came down to save us will also be the judge at the end of the world. And so he's saying, but now is the time to believe. Now is the time to believe that Jesus Christ is who he said he was, that he is raised up from the dead. But in verse 32 it says, now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, we will hear you again about this. So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined them and believed. Among them, Dionysius and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So for the very first time now, the gospel goes all the way to Athens. But let me ask you one more time here. What's on your altar today? For some of us on this altar right now, some of us on this altar, it's money, right? Where we say, you know what? If I could just have a little bit more money, my life would be okay. I could take care of all my family needs. I won't really have to worry about anymore. And ultimately what we're saying whenever we say that, I won't really have to trust God anymore because I'll have it all taken care of myself. I wonder what's on the altar for some of us. For some of us, it's not money, but actually it's fame or prestige. And we say, man, if I could just get the influencer status on Instagram, if I could be popular enough, then people might just like me and I'll feel so good about myself, I won't need the approval from God anymore because I earned it myself. I wonder how many of us For some of us, let's be honest, for some of us, it's probably a scantily clad woman because that's our addiction that we just keep going back to and back to and back to and back to, and we can't break it when we want to try it, but yet that's the thing that keeps us in bondage. For all of us, for every single one of us, at the end of the day, we try to put ourselves up here, don't we? We try to say, you know what, if I could be my own God, I would. And in this moment, all those things that we try to fulfill our life with, all the things that we say, you know what, if only I get the new car, the new house, the new boyfriend, the new girlfriend, whatever it is, if only I get that, then I will be happy. That's the very thing that you are chasing after, and yet it's the very thing that is ultimately going to leave you empty. And so whatever it is right now, that might be your unknown God, this is the moment to say, I'm going to leave that behind. This is the moment to say, I don't want this anymore. And then for all of us here that are Christians, for those of us that are Spirit-filled, for those of us that truly believe that, for those of us, if you really want to know if Jesus is your all, it's now time to be bold in your own faith. To say, you know what, Jesus is my all. So that means I'm going to spend my time, I'm going to spend my money, I'm going to be willing to look like a fool for him so that I can go out and witness to the people around me, to be bold in my faith, to go out and confront the idols here in the loving way, in the same way that Paul did, just to lovingly confront that, to point them back to Jesus. That is the same call for you and I as well. So let me ask you here, with every head bowed, every eye closed, can we just take a moment of reflection right now and ask, what's number one, the idols in my life that I need to lay down? Is there anything in your heart where you say, you know what, I've been pursuing this more than I've been pursuing God? The beautiful part is that if you are feeling distant from God this morning, the good news is he hasn't gone anywhere. He didn't leave you. You might have walked away from him, but he's always one step back. And you can take that step back today. For those of us now that says, you know what, I am a Christian, but I need to be more bold in the faith. And we're going to have an opportunity on November the 2nd to invite people out to hopefully just partake as a first step. If you're able to reach them even before they come in the door, God bless you. That's what I'm praying for. But at the very least, we can invite them in to be a part of what's going on here. And so here's the deal. On the way out today, there's tables on the walkway around here. There's cards there. In this moment of actual in prayer, we're about to wrap up our service. But could we just take a moment in prayer once again and say, God, who do you want me? Who do you want me to be reaching for you? Who should I be bold in my faith for today? That I'd have compassion as I look out and I see these towns full of people that might not know you. That I'd be provoked by the idols around me enough to actually say something. So my challenge for every single one of us here today is that on your way out here today, do not leave without getting a card, and don't leave without having a name of a person that you are going to give that card to. That you're going to be determined, say, no matter what, I'm going to invite them into the gospel today. I'm going to be bold in my faith today. So do not leave. You got to sit here through the second service. You sit here through the second service until you find that person that you can invite in.